and welcome at my talk about testing your code quality with Pester and PSScriptAnalyzer. First of all, many thanks to all our sponsors. Without these sponsors, an event like this wouldn't be possible. So can I just have a big applause for all these sponsors? Thank you. So, I'm Visser. I'm a cloud consultant at OGD ICT Diensten in the Netherlands. I work with different kinds of technologies, infrastructure as code, CI/CD, automation, DevOps, the whole buzzword bingo combined. I do it. If you want to know more about me, you can find me on Twitter, AutoSysops, or on my blog, autosysops.com. What I'm going to talk about today, I also wrote a blog post about it a couple of months ago. So if you want to know more about this, you can always find it on my blog. All the code I will be showing today and the presentation will be on the repository for PSConf later today. So if you want to try it yourself later, you can download it there and try it. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about PSCryptAnalyzer, which is a linting tool. We're going to talk about Pester, a testing tool. We're going to combine them. We're going to dive a little bit deeper in it by looking at how to do some exemptions. I think I spelled it wrong here, I see now, sorry. And we're going to do some CI/CD. So before this, let's talk a little bit about code quality, because it says in the title, we're going to test our code quality. But what actually is code quality? Because code quality doesn't really say anything about if the code is working or not. This we test with unit testing and so on. Now, code quality is more about how properly written is our code. So code quality looks at like formatting of the code. It looks at stuff like unused code, unused parameters. And we have some preferred ways of doing things. And with code quality testing, we can test if these preferred ways are actually being used or not. So it encompasses different things, the code quality. And one tool which is used very often is PSCryptAnalyzer. If you've never used it before, it's just a module you can download from the PS gallery. It's called PSCryptAnalyzer, very simple. And with this module, you can start testing your code quality already. If you're using VS Code, you might have seen in VS Code at some point like yellow lines under code or whatever. This is often due to PSCryptAnalyzer. VS Code has this built in, and we'll do some tests also with PSCryptAnalyzer. So PSCryptAnalyzer, it's a linting tool. For different languages, we have different tools to test this. And PSCryptAnalyzer we use for PowerShell. So we have our script, we run it through our linter, and we get an outcome. And the outcome can be like a checklist of things which it does or it doesn't do. So it's a very useful tool for this. And I know you all love to just see how things work. So let's dive in the demos as soon as possible. I feel almost uncomfortable with this zooming. So the people in the back, can you read what it says on the screen? Great. So I've got a little script here on the top. It's just a script, but .ps1. Can anybody tell me if they see something wrong with this script? I see somebody say it's using right host. I think there is a big split in the PowerShell community about if using right host is good or not. I'm not going to go into this discussion today, but it's at least one of the things. So I can use PSCryptAnalyzer by using invoke Script Analyzer and just giving the path to my script. So we have a folder on the left, so I'm going to source, default, script PS1. Now if I'm pressing enter, and we increase this window a little bit, Yeah, are we scrolling or not? Let's just do it again. So it's showing me actually two things to look at. So it says avoid using right host. PSCryptAnalyzer is in one camp of the people. It says it's a warning. It shows me in which script, on which line, and it gives me a little description about why I shouldn't be using this. Besides that, it says there's another problem. Avoid trailing white space. So also on line 7, if I go back to my script and we look at line 7, we see that there's actually still a white space here. Accidentally, I forgot to remove the white space. So these are the kinds of things which PSCryptAnalyzer is able to already pick up. Now, it doesn't hurt your code that much if there's this trailing white space. But yeah, it's better if it's removed. So let's quickly move on to Pester. Pester is a testing framework. Some of you might have seen it already being used during some of the other talks. Again, it's just a PowerShell module. You can download it again from the PS gallery. And with Pester, I can test my code. And there's many different tests I can do. I can do unit testing, I can do integration testing, whatever. What a testing framework like Pester does is it makes me trigger some kind of command in my code or trigger some script. It gets the output and it will compare the output. And there's many different things in Pester like mocking and other techniques to make it easier to do even more with Pester. But in the end, it's a very simple, the very basic functionality is I'm triggering something in my code, I'm getting the output, I'm comparing the output, and it will give me some kind of report saying these tests have failed or these tests haven't, or have succeeded. So we saw me using the PSCryptAnalyzer command, which is nice and good, invoke PSCryptAnalyzer. But if we're writing code for production purposes, we often want to combine this PSCryptAnalyzer into our actual testing. Before I finish up my code, push it somewhere, I want to just run all the tests, or maybe even have VS Code run all the tests for me with the extensions there are for this. So one of the tests I would like to do is to check if PSCryptAnalyzer is giving me any errors or warnings or whatever. So there's a very simple version you can do. This is the version I've seen being used quite often. So here above, you see a file called psa.tests.ps1. With Pester, we often give all our tests the name .tests.ps1. This way also VS Code knows how to handle them. So I've got the parameter. You don't have to have this parameter per se, but for these demos I have it to make my life a bit more easy. And we've got a describe and we've got an it. In frameworks, in testing frameworks, we often have like things like describe, context, and it. Context I skipped for now. So just the it is the part we're looking at now. It will be a test. So for now we just have Script Analyzer. And we do the invoke Script Analyzer. We check a certain path. There's a recursive function in there. And the output I'm going to count. So if there's anything given back by PSCryptAnalyzer, it gives me a number. And I say it should be 0. So if I'm going to run this, Pester, yes, and then we're going to do the simple one. So now I'm just saying invoke Pester. So I'm going to run a Pester test. And I'm going to use my simple test. And I'm going to run this. It asks me for the test location. For now, I'm just going to say this is source/default. So I'm going to check the scripts in source default, and these ones will be tested. It's going to run, and it's going to give me some red text. It says one text has failed, or one test has failed. Because if we were running the script analyzer, so the invoke script analyzer on default with recurse on, we would also have gotten several different tests which would have failed, or several different things by script analyzer which would have failed. If the only thing you care about is if PSConfEU has passed or not, you can work with this simple test and it would work. Most of the time, I run a bunch of tests. Some tests failed, I get the response. And if it says, well, your script analyzer tests have failed, I want to know what has failed. I don't want to then still run the PSConfEU over all my files to spot which files actually have these problems. So for this, I created a bit more advanced version. So this advanced version, again, it has a test location, just as we had before. And what I'm doing is in this part, I'm getting all the rules. So PSConfEU has several different rules it's using to check if the code quality is good or not. I'm getting these different rules and I'm storing them in an array, and I'm also storing the severity. So you saw before that some things were a warning, some things were information, some might also be an error. So I'm storing the different severities. This I'm doing for a demo we will look at later. And then I'm going to do a test, and I'm still using test cases here. Sorry for the people from Pester who are present here. I should be using for each by now, but this is some other demo. For the people who don't know, test cases is kind of deprecated by now, and they want us to use for each for this. It would work exactly the same. There's a parameter, the rule name. So now I'm doing a test for each different rule. So this will loop and make a test for every different rule we just gathered. And now the magic sauce. I'm doing the invoke script analyzer for this specific rule. And for each outcome, so every outcome there is, I'm just gonna make a string of it. And these strings will be appended together. And I'm checking if these strings together are null or empty. So if there won't be any outcome of PSConfEU, it should be an empty string. It should be nothing. But if there is an outcome, I'm getting information in this. And now the beauty is, let's view the terminal again. If I'm going to run this, invoke Pester, and now let's take the advanced one. And let's again do it for source default. You will see that we again have tests failed. This time we have several different tests which are failed for the different rules which have failed. And in this view, it's not that easy to see, but it says here, expected null or empty, but it got this. So it got problem in script PS1 at line 7 with the message line has trailing white space, and also in script 2 at line 10 there's a trailing white space. So this time in my test result I actually got the information I can already use to now fix the scripts. So I don't have to run the script analyzer again to figure this out. So this can make my life as a developer a lot easier, because this way I can just run my tests and then start fixing them. So I can just look at this. Okay, line 7 in script 1, line 10 in script 2. In the next one, script 2, line 10, message echo is an alias. Well, let's look at script 2 actually. Yeah, I'm using echo. PSCryptAnalyzer doesn't really like that I'm using echo, so I should probably change this. Now, I was already referring to also the severities, because sometimes maybe I only want to have like warnings or errors. If there's like these information ones, trailing white space for example, I don't really care about them, but I only care about the warnings. Or maybe I also only want to have the information ones. So by building it this way, we can actually also call this script again. Let's clear it up for a moment. And let's make this big again. So again, I can do the invoke Pester, and I can get tags included. And tags is a thing in Pester where I can give some tags to my test, and it will only run the tests with these tags. So for example, I can only ask for the tags with information. Now if I run it, and I say it's in source default, we'll only get one failed test. But it also says it only passed 10 tests. So I did a lot less tests this time. I only tested the script analyzer warning, or the script analyzer things which were on the severity information. And only one of them has failed, which is again, I believe, the trailing white space. So this way I can maybe say these information ones, I don't care, only warning and error ones should actually be shown, and these information ones not. That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is actually working with exemptions. So it might happen that you're making a script, and in this script you're having several different errors shown by Script Analyzer. Some of them you might not agree with. For example, the right host. Maybe for some reason you want to use right host. You could build your test in a way where you just exempt every test of right host. But sometimes you only want to exempt it for this specific file. In this case, we can use this line of code, diagnostic code analyze suppress message attribute. And we can use this to suppress a specific error. So if I'm looking at this folder, we have the same script 1 again, which had the problem of right host and which had the problem of the trailing white space. The trailing white space is still here. And the right host is also still here. But now, here at the top, I've got avoid trailing white space and I've got a justification. So this even allows you to already enter why is this line exempted. So for this purposes, it's just a demo, but it will generate self-documenting code in a way, because the documentation of why we exempt this test is in my code. I don't have a separate file showing it. Now if I'm running the invoke script analyzer, and we're running it for exemptions script.ps1. I'm typing something wrong. Yeah, I'm not in source, excuse me. There's no error. Script Analyzer is like, great, your code is all good to go, because I have these exemptions. The same is for script 2. In script 2, I also added the exemptions. Now also, if I'm using the tests I built before, and I'm using, for example, the simple one, and I say we go now to source exemptions, said all the tests have passed, because also Pester, when it's calling PSCryptAnalyzer, is looking at these exemptions. And the same goes for the advanced one, of course. It now says 65 tests have passed. So these exemptions are a very nice way to make sure that your code will be tested with all the tests available. But if there's one line which is causing a problem, you can disable it. Ones which pop up very frequently, for example, are PSCryptAnalyzer will check in your function name if it uses plural words. And it says you shouldn't be using plural in it. But if you're working with some Azure resources or some other products, it might detect the name of the product or the name of the Azure resource as a plural word and says, well, this function is not according to the naming convention. Then you can just use an exemption to make sure that it will pass, because we all agreed, well, let's just use this name. Now the last step is to also integrate this whole testing into our CI/CD pipelines. So most of us, we will probably be using some kind of CI/CD system. I personally like using Azure DevOps. But everything I will be showing can also be done with GitHub and GitHub Actions. So if I'm having code and I want to push it to like my main branch, often we first create our separate branch, or we have different branching strategies that we create it somewhere else, and then we have to merge it with our main. To do this, we can create a pull request. But let's get back a little bit. Maybe I just want to have an automated way of running all these tests. So once in a while, I just want to run these tests on my code base. Well, in Azure DevOps, we have something called pipelines, which is equivalent to GitHub Actions. So here I've got exactly the same files, and I've made a little YAML file which describes the pipeline, which will trigger the test file. I will show it in here because here I'm zoomed in more. Oh, let's go here. So what this mostly does is it does a little initialization, which is installing the different modules. If they're not installed, it checks if the modules are installed or not. And then it sets up some Pester configuration. I will explain what it actually does a bit. So I'm setting up a test location. I'm setting up where to find the files to test. I'm setting a pass-through, so I will get some of the information also shown. Some of these configurations are default, but here they are specifically shown. And also, I'm creating the test results and I'm putting them in a XML file. So I'm creating a report which will be stored in an XML file. And if we're looking at the YAML file, we'll see we have two tasks. The first task is just running the test.ps1. And the second task is publishing the test report. So in Azure DevOps, we have the option to publish our test report. So for the sake of time, I won't run the whole pipeline. I will show you how I can run it, and then we'll look at a previous run. So I've set up this pipeline to just use this YAML file. And I could just say run it, run, and it will start running. This will take a little while, especially because I'm using Microsoft hosted agents at the moment. So I'll be just dropped in the queue, and somewhere between 5 seconds and 5 days it will be completed. So let's look at the run I did earlier. So you see the run also said it's failed. I've got different options to say the run will pass or not, depending on if tests are failed or not. I prefer to have my pipeline fail if my tests have failed. And it's showing me here that some of the tests have failed. I'm using the advanced script, which we were showing before. So here I already see some of the tests which were failing, like avoiding trailing white space, using commandlet aliases. I can click on it. I will be brought to the screen. And sorry, nobody shouted zoom it yet. But I think even if we try zooming it, reading this is not nice. I think you all agree with me that reading this is not nice. Luckily, we also published our test report to Azure DevOps. And here I've got the test report, which I have to zoom out a little bit to show you properly. So it's showing me some nice pie graphs of the amount of tests which have succeeded and which have failed. And it's also showing me which different tests have failed. And now the fun part, because we're using this advanced version, I can also click on it. And here, I'm seeing this exact error message again in this nice box. So instantly I can see, well, script 1 at line 7, trailing white space, and script 2 at line 10. So I have a very nice interface to show me the different problems and give me a report. And now the last part, if you really want to, many of the Git systems like GitHub and Azure DevOps, they will have something like a pull request validation. So if I'm making a pull request, I can run some kind of pipeline or GitHub action. So for example, in Azure DevOps, I could go to my repositories, to my branches. I can say I want to add some branch policies. And here's some build validation. And I can select the pipeline. I only make one pipeline, so I can say this pipeline. I can have it trigger automatically. I can say if it's required or optional, so I can just show it in my pull request, like it's failed, but you're allowed to continue, or it's failed and you really have to fix this. And I can say something about the expiration. And now if I save this, normally it should work. Yes, I do need to give it a name. Now every time I make a pull request, it will first run this pipeline on the code I'm trying to push to my main branch. And only if all the Script Analyzer tests have succeeded, will it go on. So somebody doing code review has some help from my systems. They don't have to check everywhere, are they using right host or not? Are they using, do they have any trailing white spaces left? No, this will be tested by my code. And that's the half hour already. So, are there any questions?
Yeah, the testing, we have to find the test plans as well.
The question is if the test will be able to, if you find them back in the test plan, right? Yeah. So, in Azure DevOps, there is like the test plans section here. I must say personally, I don't really work with test plans that often. From what I understood, it's mostly for also like different manual tests and to create a whole set. I believe it's possible to send pipeline output back to like a test plan. So you should be able to add some pipeline to it, but I don't have that much experience with it. So should work though. Any other questions?
Is there a good option to run the test before the users can push the code into the repository? Have them on their workstation run the test?
Yeah. So the question is if there's a good way to force the users to run the tests before it will be pushed to like a remote repository, right? So there's several different ways of doing it. If you're using Git, you can use something which is called Git hooks. I won't be showing it, but you can look it up with Git hooks. You can add things which have to be done before certain Git tasks. So for example, you can say before a push, it should run this. So you can then say it should run, invoke Pester, do this, and if it fails, it should just throw, and then the Git action won't complete, and it will show you this error. This is a way of doing it. Personally, I find this very limiting, especially if you're like a developer and you're like, almost done for the day, let me just quickly push it to my development branch. So if my laptop gets lost today, I haven't lost all my work. This could cause for some problems. So this is why, personally, I would prefer to have it run on like my remote server. Now with pipelines, you can also build up your pipelines in a way where you just have them trigger that every time something is pushed to a certain branch or just to all branches, you can have it run the pipeline. So you could have every time something is pushed to the remote, just have the pipeline run and send the developer, for example, an email like, hey, your pipeline has failed. So these are options. Any more questions? Then I think I want to thank you all for listening to this talk, and I hope to see you all again. And if you have any more questions, you can always find me. I'll be here the whole conference. Thank you.